Transit systems are networks, and we talk a lot on this channel about how to make them function better. From how things are served or not served, how far apart stops should be, frequency, padding, clock-based scheduling. But when, for the first time in a long time last year, I found myself living on the edge of downtown Toronto, I noticed a problem, and one that should be stricken from our transit networks. Because it, like so many problems with transit systems, is the effective planning that doesn't actually consider how people will use the transit. I call it the problem of two lines, and it's a pernicious, wasteful transit anti-pattern that I think we need to work hard to remove from our cities. And I'm going to tell you all about it. Welcome to RM Transit, where I complain about parts of transit networks that need a redesign. So what is the problem of two lines? Let me break it down for you. Far too often in urban areas, a public transit agency will run an infrequent bus in close proximity to a frequent rapid transit line. If you have any examples of this in your city, leave them down in the comments. This is a weird situation because the bus is almost never a faster option for riders, and thus it gets little use and sits in this weird sort of transit purgatory, where people demand that the agency runs the route so that they have a bus out front, and yet not that many people use the route because it's not very useful, wasting resources. Let me paint you a more specific example. I used to live near DuPont and Christie in Toronto, which isn't downtown, but it's still pretty central. It's just a couple kilometer walk from the lakefront and a short distance from St. George at the edge of the subway U that I think most people think of as defining downtown. Now say I wanted to go to St. George Station, or really any location east, southeast, or south of that point, which would require me going through St. George Station. How do I actually get there? Do I take the direct bus just out front on DuPont? Well, I found myself basically never doing this. Walking to the subway takes 10 to 12 minutes, and optimistically the bus comes every 30. So at least half the time I'll get to the subway before I would get on the bus. And of course, once I get on the subway, I'm going to be going much faster. What's even crazier though is that I found myself often walking to DuPont Station. This is right on the route of the bus, but what I found was that since it's only a 15-minute walk, you're usually better off walking than catching the bus. Because even if the bus comes after 12 or maybe even 10 minutes, you may still well beat it to your final destination because in Toronto at least, buses often get stuck in traffic. You see, low frequency service really suffers for short trips in dense urban areas, which is why rapid transit operating at high speeds with high frequency is so important. For a lot of these short trips, you can walk or cycle, assuming that's possible where you live. And of course, it's often true in central parts of cities, which means you're usually going to be better off not taking the bus or the tram. There's even more reason for people not to want to wait, and that's because people don't like waiting. They perceive time spent waiting as taking longer than time spent in motion, so even just walking has a huge benefit. But this, of course, is only half the equation. The problem is amplified by the presence of rapid transit. Because even for longer trips, it will often be faster to walk, which is rather slow, to a faster mode as opposed to waiting for a slower one. Moreover, if you walk straight to rapid transit, you might get to avoid a transfer, which most people find annoying. Obviously, some people need the bus, but for people with a choice, waiting for a bus like this is almost never going to be the best option. It's the closest you can really get in Toronto to the experience of being in a small town where transit service is infrequent and unreliable, or a large US city. But this is crazy because it's so close to the downtown core where you'd expect transit to be really good. And of course, the problem is very broad. It's not limited to Toronto, and arguably Montreal has this problem even worse. And that's because the city has a ton of very infrequent bus lines closely paralleling the metro. To be honest, it's insane. For example, look at the Orange Line. Just to the west of it, you have the 55 bus on Saint Laurent, which runs like half-hourly after 7 p.m. and is only 600 meters away from the metro. To the east, you have the 14 bus, which runs right by Parc La Fontaine. Great park, by the way, and it runs only about every 50 minutes. That's all despite it being just 400 meters away from the metro. There are exceptionally few trips where taking the 14 bus would be faster than taking the metro and then walking, and that's a huge problem. Now, beyond the fact that no transit agency should ever run a bus on a 50-minute headway, Montreal is even less able to get away with this abysmal level of frequency because people have a real option, cycling. Though I can't entirely rule out the possibility that the reason Montreal cycling is good is because people got sick of waiting for the buses. At least in Toronto, when you leave the central city, and this is admittedly very weird, service frequency gets way better. So then, the problem identified, how do we go about fixing it? What's funny is that the problem here in these urban centers is very similar to the problem you see across North America with suburban bus networks, where you have a ton of low-frequency meandering routes and not a strong, frequent grid that people can interchange on. In this case, there actually is a grid of transit lines, but it's far too coarse, meaning far too few of the routes actually operate frequently and are therefore useful. Too many streets have buses, not enough streets have frequent buses. The answer? Consolidation. In the Montreal case, if we look just a little further to the west, we can see that the Park Avenue bus is also kind of crappy. It only runs about every 20 minutes for a lot of the day. But to be fair, Park Avenue is 1 kilometer away from the metro, so it actually does justify a decent bus service. If we were to reallocate the bus service from the two infrequent routes closest to the metro to the Park bus, it could actually operate pretty frequently, every 10 minutes or so. You'd have fewer bus routes, but more good ones. Doing this would probably actually increase bus ridership because even though you're reducing the number of routes and the coverage of the buses, you're actually providing better service. Right now, your best bet is often to just skip the buses altogether. Of course, we generally shouldn't lean in the direction of simply cutting bus routes, but enhance their frequency so that their existence makes sense, and so that they're not wasting resources that could be better used on other routes to improve frequency. My guess as to why this is a problem that reoccurs in multiple cities is that downtown people are more willing to demand a bus and the transit agency is more willing to oblige. But this leads to a crazy situation where you have a bunch of vehicles on parallel routes that are not far apart running very infrequently, meaning that if you want to travel, say, east-west or north-south, it's very impractical because you have to determine which one of these north-south routes is going to come first and then try to catch the bus on it. Which in practice, when there's a rapid transit line, means most people are probably just going to walk to the rapid transit line because they know a vehicle will come quickly. Ultimately, it's kind of like transit heat death. Transit is just spread way too thin. Now, fixing transit heat death could rely on a few different ideas. One of them is that you shouldn't operate any bus route that has a frequency of less than, say, every 15 minutes, because doing that is really wasteful. If you really think a bus route shouldn't be cut, you need to increase its service. And a local transit route like a bus that's proximal to a rapid transit route, its average wait time should always be shorter than the time it would take you to walk to the rapid transit. So if you have a bus that's 400 meters from a subway line, the frequency should be at least every 10 minutes, and 800 meters away, it should be every 20 at minimum. All this might sound like a small detail, but to make our cities better and fight climate change, we need to get these small details right. Every bus driving around burning diesel on a route that's not very useful could be moving people and getting them out of cars. Thanks for watching.